Hello, BookTube. Hello to all my Middlemarch meditation viewers. If this episode seems to have come quite quickly after the last one, it's okay, stay calm. You are not losing track of time. This is a bonus episode, and I'm kind of excited about it. I'll tell you why. When I started this BookTube channel, what I really hoped for myself was this. I hoped that I would find a small number of people, and yeah, I only needed it to be small. I'm flattered by all the subscription numbers that have accumulated on this channel in 11 months. It's fantastic, but I didn't start my channel with big subscription numbers in mind. I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew it was never going to be the sort of thing that had mass market popularity. Life has taught me, if it's taught me anything, that I'm not one of those people who always knows what is or what will be really popular. And I finally got old enough to stop worrying about that. But okay, I am straying a little bit from my point. What I most wanted to gain from BookTube was a small number of friends who love to dig deep, to analyze books, and to ask and answer perceptive questions about those books. And I think I can say that right now I'm exchanging comments with 7 different BookTube creators who fit that description. And the newest one is David from Polyglot Reading. David speaks German, English, Italian, French, and Yiddish. He reads in those languages and he reviews books in those languages. I'm going to be shameless, utterly shameless. Ask you, visit his channel, please. Sample some content. I won't have to ask you to subscribe because I think the kind of people who follow these meditations will see the value of David's work and they'll want to add him to their subscriptions list. So, David watched the previous episode of Middlemarch Meditations where we covered chapter 8, and he sent me 2 comments afterwards. The first comment was a new perception of Sir James Chetham's behavior and the reasons for it. Behavior which puzzled me because it seemed so unlike the character as I'd come to understand him up to that point in the book. I'm going to talk about that first. And a while later, David left a second comment which was asking a question about Mr. Casaubon's aunt, that unfortunate woman who was disowned by her family for making a bad match. It led me to do some historical research, look in JSTOR, and voila, I opened a door to a whole other major theme that we will see revisited in Middlemarch, and that scholarship is suggesting it's a theme that appears in other Eliot novels as well. Okay, so let's get right to it. I'm going to quote now from David's first comment. About the first paragraph of chapter 8, I don't see it as just a sign of noble feelings by Sir James, but more as an at least slightly egoistic character trait, sort of psychological self-protection mechanism. He is protecting his own ego by reversing the hierarchy between himself and Casaubon and Dorothea. He is not a rejected suitor, i.e., sort of below Dorothea, a victim, but he can place himself above Dorothea as the one who is high enough to just feel pity about her. Similar to the racist stroke white supremacy sort of thing explained by the Desdemona-Othello example. So excellent points. And I tried to illustrate the power dynamic here with this lovely Raphaelite, I think, or pre-Raphaelite painting. But I'm thinking the better way to diagram what I feel David is saying, I'm going to do something very, very different. So you all bear with me because this is going to look really, really weird, very unusual for a Middlemarch meditation. So I'm going to put some letters on the screen. J standing for Sir James Chetham, B for Mr. Brooke, Dorothea's uncle, C for Casaubon, D for Dorothea, and try to show the power dynamic between them. Of course, we're just going to have to move everybody up because, of course, in any power dynamic in 19th century England, the woman is lower than any man. However, there are men that have more direct authority over her and men who have less. Before she is proposed to by Casaubon, the person in direct authority over her is Mr. Brooke, her uncle, her appointed guardian. So James Chetham I put very close by because there is obviously some kind of tacit agreement or understanding between Brooke and Sir James Chetham that he is courting her. I don't know how that was communicated. The book doesn't say. And so I put him close. In other words, he's likely to usurp Mr. Brooke. If he proposes, Dorothea accepts, she becomes his fiancée and then later on his wife. However, Casaubon proposes, And that knocks the whole power dynamic off. It means that Sir James now moves off to one side, like so. I mean, he's still a man, but he's not a man affianced to Dorothea, and Casaubon now takes this place. And in fact, of course, the expectation is that Mr. Brooke will move out of the way, and he'll still have, I suppose, some say over Dorothea's life as guardian. But once Casaubon and Dorothea are married, the direct authority will transfer to Casaubon. This leaves Sir James Chetham in a very difficult position. And I suppose what David was suggesting was that if he was honest about himself being a rejected suitor, then he kind of falls out of the realm of authority over Dorothea. But you'll remember the epigram at the head of chapter 8, and I've got it here, so I'm just going to quickly reread it. It says, "Oh, rescue her, I am her brother now, and you her father. Every gentle maid should have a guardian in each gentleman." And I opposed that quote a little bit. I thought, you can't have every man being in charge of you. It simply isn't, logistically it will not work. But what Sir James wants to do is recover from this really unfortunate position of being the rejected suitor. And so he effectively elevates himself now by saying that he is concerned about this marriage and wondering if it should go ahead, and wondering if Mr. Brooke has been a responsible guardian by allowing it to go ahead. He is saying, no, I believe I should raise myself up at least to the same level as Mr. Brooke, because I am taking responsibility for Dorothea, more responsibility than he is. He should not be allowing this marriage to go ahead. By taking that stance, yes, it could be that there's some real feeling behind there. Certainly the end of chapter 8, when it shows how much Sir James enjoys Dorothea's company and still isn't giving much attention to Celia, it does suggest there is some underlying feeling. But I do think David's observation has merit, because for Sir James, a man so used to being in a position of privilege, of being right, it's going to be difficult for him to accept being pushed out into a position where he has no say over Dorothea's life. He might not appreciate that. And so if he sets himself up as a pseudo Mr. Brooke, a pseudo uncle, brother, father, then he still retains a certain authority over. He certainly raises himself up status-wise. He's not a man that Dorothea can ignore in his own mind. We can't speak for Dorothea's mind, but in Sir James's mind, if he's looking out for her better interests and trying to protect her, then he's giving himself status. So I'm hoping those letters kind of illustrate. I think that is what, David, what you're trying to say. Correct me if I've not quite got that. But it does reconcile chapter 8 for me. I did now understand, why is this man who up until now, he's a man accustomed to his superior position, his upbringing and the prevailing culture support him in this notion. He has no reason to doubt his thinking. Rejection by Dorothea does cause him temporary discomfort, and perhaps for the first time he may have to consider that he's not what he thinks he is. The cultural atmosphere is not going to favor that kind of self-perception. It isn't. So it's not surprising for Sir James to arrive, as David seems to be suggesting, at a new understanding, which in fact restores him to his feeling of natural superiority. By nominating himself as a brother-uncle figure to Dorothea, he elevates his status. Now let's go back to David's comment, because I want to pick up on the Othello-Desdemona connection. Desdemona had a rejected suitor also, a man named Roderigo. Roderigo had tried to get Desdemona's hand in marriage. Not only was he refused, but Desdemona's father ordered him to stop coming around the house. He went and he found a partner in misery. He found Iago, Othello's ensign. Iago wanted to be promoted to lieutenant in Othello's company, but he did not get the job. That went to another man called Cassio. Also, Iago has heard rumors that his wife had an affair with Othello. So you have these two men with scores to settle. They have lost their masculine position of superiority, and they want to set out and cause trouble for Othello and Desdemona right from the start. You could say that Roderigo and Iago, like Sir James Chetham, have been rejected, and that loss of status, they need to restore it. Now, Shakespearean men, they don't have to be as well-mannered as Sir James Chetham. Iago and Roderigo were created at a time when it was legal in England to challenge a rival to a duel, and kill him if you happen to be the better swordsman. Sir James, now, he has to work within different social constraints, right? He cannot kill Kuzmic, but he can attempt to discredit him by implying that he's taken advantage of a young woman who is too inexperienced to know what she wants, to know what is good for her. And Sir James can also discredit Mr. Brooke for being negligent in his duties as a guardian. This is killing reputation rather than killing the man. But that can be just as damaging, and we see it too in Othello. When Cassio is brought down, Iago works out a plan to damage his reputation, and he knows exactly what he has lost. Cassio says, reputation, reputation, reputation. Oh, I've lost my reputation. I have lost the immortal part of myself, and what remains is bestial. So it's almost comparing reputation to your soul, to what is immortal. You lose that, it doesn't matter that you still retain a human body and a human brain. You have lost what is truly valuable inside of you. So to sum up, what I had perceived as changed behavior on the part of Sir James Chetham and the possibility of genuine feelings for Dorothea, I am now slightly reconsidering. And as a result, I'm starting to see my concept of the novel shifting. All of a sudden, I realize chapter 8, which I didn't think of as very significant, might actually be quite significant. I had thought up until now that this was the story of a young woman and her search for spiritual and intellectual fulfillment. But any search of that nature in England during the 1830s could not help but also be a political action, because the spiritual and intellectual realms were designated for men only. And so Dorothea's seemingly small decisions are also attempts at political reform. And I don't know whether she's conscious of that yet. Sir James may have a point about her youth and inexperience. Dorothea may only be conscious of her own personal need. But to create a character, for Eliot to create a character like Dorothea in a novel set in the early 1830s, when England was making its first baby steps with the first Reform Act, those first steps at extending suffrage, at changing the way it governed itself, now I'm beginning to feel that this novel is actually about that power shift, but it just taking it down to a more personal, domestic level. Okay, let's go on now to David's second comment, where he says, I wonder whether you could explain why the marriage of Mr. Casaubon's aunt was considered an unfortunate one, justifying her being disowned. Was a marriage with a foreigner generally thought to be a bad one in 19th century England, or does this indicate that something else was wrong with this Polish husband? He's referring, of course, to chapter 8, to page 69, where Humphrey Cadwallader is responding to Sir James' question about Mr. Casaubon. Has he got any heart? To which the rector replies, well, yes, I don't mean of the melting sort, but a sound kernel that you may be sure of. He is very good to his poor relations, pensions several of the women, and is educating a young fellow at a good deal of expense. Casaubon acts up to his sense of justice. His mother's sister made a bad match. A Pole, I think, lost herself, at any rate was disowned by her family. Now, David, I'm speaking to you directly now. I have to be transparent and admit that I read over Humphrey Cadwallader's response, and I just assumed, in the way you remarked, that Casaubon's aunt was disowned purely because her husband was a foreigner. Now, that probably reveals a personal cynicism. When I emigrated to the United Kingdom in 1986 from Canada, one of the culture shocks for me was how openly xenophobia was expressed and felt in England, how normalized it was. It is an aspect of English culture that I have never grown accustomed to or comfortable with. But I think that there may have been more than just xenophobia that caused the disowning of Casaubon's maternal aunt. And for that, everybody, we need to review a little history. We need to go back to the 1770s, when Poland was nominally independent, but in reality their leaders were being chosen by the Russian Tsar. The Tsar then was Catherine the Great, and she had also gained territory that formerly belonged to the Ottoman Empire down in the south of Europe. Unfortunately, that threatened territories that came under the influence of the Habsburg Empire in Austria, okay? In Europe, nothing is ever simple. And there came a point where it seemed as though Austria was going to declare war against Russia. Now, had war broken out, the Russians could turn to Prussia, on the other side of Poland because Prussia had signed an alliance agreement. However, Frederick II in Prussia, his finances had been drained by previous wars. He really wasn't in a position to go to battle again. So the French, yes, the French are involved as well. The French had maintained friendly relations with Prussia, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. Great. So they suggested to all parties that instead of losing money, fighting with no guarantee of reward, what Russia, Prussia, and Austria should do is unite their armies to defeat the weak Polish state and then divide up the country. So that's what happened in 1772. But that was not the end. There were more adjustments to the partition of Poland in 1793 and then again in 1830, around the time Middlemarch is set. Polish government officials, leaders of radical movements that were opposed to partition, and aristocrats whose land had been seized, they were all forced to flee the country. A significant number of Polish government officials, they went to Paris. There was almost a government in exile there, but a significant number also fled to England because there was a media campaign to assist them financially, and they got the sympathy of the English public initially about their plight. So there were public donations, and there were also actions by private individuals. Well, naturally, wherever there is charity, wherever people are willing to give to help those who are in need, unfortunately, there will be fraudsters. In the 1850s, the English journalist Henry Mayhew wrote his famous series of articles for the Morning Chronicle newspaper, giving details of real life for the working class and the poor in London. I'd like to read part of what he wrote concerning those who were needy and also Polish. And I'm just going to let it fill the screen here because that'll make it easier for us both to read. Destitute Poles. It is now many years since the people of this country evinced a strong sympathy for Polish refugees. Their gallant struggle, compulsory exile, and utter national and domestic ruin raised them warm friends in England, and committees for the relief of destitute Poles, balls for the benefit of destitute Poles, and subscriptions for the relief of the destitute Poles were got up in every market town. Shelter and sustenance were afforded to many gentlemen of undoubted integrity, who found themselves penniless in a strange land, and the aristocracy feted and caressed the best born and the most gallant. To be a Pole and in distress was almost a sufficient introduction, and there were few English families who did not entertain as friend or visitor one of these unfortunate and suffering patriots. So excellent an opportunity for that class of foreign swindlers which haunt roulette tables and are the pest of second-rate hotels abroad was, of course, made use of. Crowds of adventurers got up in furs and cloaks and playhouse dresses, with padded breasts and long mustachios, flocked to England, and assuming the title of Count and giving out that their patrimony had been sequestered by the Emperor of Russia, easily obtained a hearing and a footing in many English families whose heads would not have received one of their own countrymen except with the usual credentials. John Bull's partiality for foreigners is one of his well-known weaknesses, and valets, cooks, and couriers in their master's clothes, and sometimes with the titles of that master whom they had been seen shot down in battle, found themselves objects of national sympathy and attention. Their success among the fair sex was extraordinary, and many penniless adventurers with no accomplishments beyond card sharping and a foreign hotel waiter's smattering of continental languages allied themselves to families of wealth and respectability. All, of course, were not so fortunate, and after some persons had been victimized, a few inquiries made, and the real refugee gentlemen and soldiers had indignantly repudiated any knowledge of the swindlers or their pretensions, the pseudo-Polish exiles were compelled to return to their former occupations. The least able and least fortunate were forced to beg, and adopted exactly the same tactics as the French beggar, except that instead of certificates of birth and passports, he exhibited false military documents and told lying tales of regimental services, Russian prisons, and miraculous escapes. The destitute Pole is seldom met with now, and would hardly have demanded a notice if I had not thought it right to show how soon the unsuccessful cheat or swindler drops down into the beggar, and to what a height the Polish fever raged some 30 years ago. Now, I won't go on and read the rest. I will leave the last paragraph up for a few seconds, or you can pause the video, because you will see he talks about a specific case of a man who married, I think, 3 different women, defrauded them all of their money. So you can see this kind of thing was happening here and there. There were people pretending to be Polish, or what he doesn't list is possibly Polish people pretending to be a little bit more important or moneyed or connected than they actually were. One could understand taking a tactic like that if you needed to survive. But that text comes straight out of Project Gutenberg, because of course all Henry Mayhew's work, his full London Labour and the London Poor, is available on Project Gutenberg. So you can read, anybody can read this text. It isn't something that you need to buy if you're interested in it for other reasons. So it is possible that Casaubon's aunt was the victim of one of these fraudsters, or her family just assumed that that might be the case, and so they disowned her in order to protect their assets from being squandered. And then there's another possibility, because some of those Polish refugees who fled, they fled because their radical politics would have got them arrested and executed by any of the three powers who were carving up the country. We can see how deeply conservative the politics of Middlemarch are. And in England, there was always anxiety that the radical ideas would somehow creep across the channel from revolutionary France and America, and now, of course, Poland, and then cause domestic unrest. We are flip-flopping all over the place in this video, aren't we? If anybody has already read Middlemarch and they're following these meditations, you will know that when Mr. Cadwallader talks about how Casaubon is, quote, educating a young fellow at a good deal of expense, he is referring to a character who has not appeared in the novel yet, in our meditations yet, but he soon will. I'm not going to give away more than that, and I don't know much more than that, okay? In case anyone is doing a first read and they don't want spoilers, I am with you on that. But I think it is safe to say that this young man is very likely the son of Casaubon's aunt and her Polish husband. This means the Polish connection, which I did not think was that important or meant anything, may turn out to be very important. If you don't mind spoilers, or you already know Middlemarch but would like a deeper study of the way the novel looks at Polish radicalism, then please check out the link that I'm going to put in my description box. It's an essay written by Tatiana Kuzmic from a book titled Family Politics and National Anxiety in the European Novel. This essay is offered free of charge on JSTOR. If you don't already have a free account on JSTOR and you love in-depth literary discussion, then you've got to go there and check it out, definitely. Okay, everyone, that is it. Let's just clear some stuff. Let's just tidy things up here and end with a picture. Thank you so much, David at Polyglot Reader. I hope you find opportunity to ask more questions like these, because they demonstrate what an amazing writer George Eliot is. It seems to be impossible to exhaust the possibilities for discussion when you're reading any of her books. I hope you've also recovered from your cold, by the way. I hope everyone is keeping well. In fact, spring is coming, everybody. All you in the Northern Hemisphere, you just got to hang in there, right? Okay, everybody. Take care. Nice to talk to you again. Bye-bye.